Partial funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and through financial support of viewers like you.
Good evening and welcome to At Issue. I'm Scott Harris. Tonight we have a one-on-one interview with a special guest, Congressman John Mica, elected last year to his first term in the Congress from Florida's new 7th Congressional District, a Republican. The district runs from Orlando to Daytona Beach, although it doesn't really encompass either of those cities. It's kind of a suburban district.
It goes from one end to the other. But I'm glad to be with you, Scott, and look forward to discussing some of the issues that have been before the Congress and will be before the Congress in the upcoming year.
Good. I'm glad to have you. Just as a quick background, your background is in business and in government. You are not an attorney.
That's right.
My father would appreciate that very much. The chief.
I have a lot of company, though, with over 200 attorneys in Congress.
Yeah, there are quite a few. You were the chief of staff for Senator Paula Hawkins in the early 80s, and you were in the Florida House of Representatives for 4 years in the late 70s. As I said, you were newly elected. You are a Republican congressman. You're a freshman. The Democrats have taken over the White House in the administration for the first time in a dozen years. How was your first year?
Well, it was sort of like a ride on a wild roller coaster out at Disney or one of the attractions. I guess President Clinton and his wife Hillary have kept it exciting just about every week.
You've had issues to vote on, big important issues or high-profile issues?
That's right, high-profile, and we hear from Floridians and from people of the 7th Congressional District. They're very anxious about some of the things that have taken place and concerned, and they do write and call. So it's been a very active session. We've tackled some controversial issues and some that have made a number of the headlines.
Well, let's hit on one of the more recent high-profile issues and touch on that, the NAFTA treaty, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Your vote on that was against.
Yes, I voted against NAFTA. Actually, when you look at the legislation that was before us, and we really only had 3 documents that we were dealing with. One was the enabling legislation, the other was the side agreements, and of course the treaty itself. Having worked in international trade and represented a number of companies in the international arena, I looked at it pretty closely, and I thought overall it was a great deal for Mexico, but it was a bad deal for the United States and the taxpayer. The enabling legislation that passed and the side agreements cut some pretty good deals for a couple of industries that needed to be protected, and there probably will be some net gain in jobs for some people. I said NAFTA provided for winners and losers, and I wasn't prepared to sell out for just some people who would win. I felt in the long term, for example, Florida agriculture, fresh fruits and vegetables, once the barriers and tariffs all came down in about 10 years, you would wipe out half of what we know as Florida's agricultural industry. So I felt it was a bad deal for some, a good deal for others, and I think we could have negotiated a much better treaty. The other problem I had is funding of NAFTA. The cost is estimated to be anywhere between $9 and $11 billion. We're providing the construction of some infrastructure. We're providing the cleanup of some environmental damage that's been done by companies who moved from the United States and other places to go to Mexico and to violate the environment, and now we're going to pay the tab for it. So some parts of the agreement I had some real problems with.
Let me ask you a little bit about, to get a feeling for what goes on in Washington. There was a lot of pressure being applied there, and this was a very, to me, an interesting issue. You've been in politics a long time. I followed it. This is not what you would call a sexy issue that would seem to capture the imagination of the public, like the gun control legislation and so forth. Why did it become such a high-profile issue?
Well, unfortunately, the administration spent a lot of time dealing with a whole host of other controversial issues when they should have focused on the economy. and some of the specifics in this treaty and the enabling legislation, like how to pay for it and what would be a better deal for the taxpayer. I think that I ended up voting no against this legislation because they couldn't offer me a deal. The only thing I have in the 7th Congressional District are taxpayers. I don't have any big federal projects. I don't have any facilities to close down or add to. They couldn't offer me a bridge or anything. And I didn't feel I should negotiate the overall standing of the country on the basis of this vote. It shouldn't be negotiated away for the benefit of a few. And in fact, I represented in the private sector some of those big corporations who will benefit from this. And so I had to vote against some of my friends there. But I wasn't prepared to put others out of business.
What, did you get pressure? Did you get?
Oh, I got a tremendous amount of pressure from the White House. They went through my family. They went through every possible contact you could imagine, people that I did business with in my previous real life. But again, I tried to judge this, having dealt with Mexico before, knowing I can give you some specific instances where businesses moved down there just to because they didn't want to comply with the environmental laws, with the labor laws, with the wage laws. The average Mexican earns 50 cents an hour, which is their minimum wage or less. We can't compete with that. The thing that's good about treaties of this nature, for example, a European community, the common market, that's great because you have equal trading partners. You bring those barriers down and it's great to trade. It's good between the United States and Canada because you have equal system of justice, equal system of enforcement, similar labor standards, and a way to enforce the treaty. Mexico, it's que pasa. And I can tell you that. I checked, I gave them every benefit of the doubt right up to the last minute, and you still are not capable of dealing on a business fashion in a similar way that you can, say, with Canada or European or equal trading partners. They're in another era. It's a great deal for Mexico. It's a bad deal for the United States.
Before we move on, Ron, let me ask you, as I understand what you said, is that we could have negotiated a better deal.
Yes.
Does that mean to say you are not against an agreement of some kind of trade?
Oh, no.
Mexico?
It would have been good. Exactly. And 3 documents. You had the enabling legislation, and we haven't faced yet the question of how you're going to pay for all of this. They passed the enabling legislation. Some of the promises that were made there, now our taxpayers are going to have to cough up. I think that that was a bad deal. The side agreements, some were good, some were bad. If we'd had some measures in there that would have kept the tariffs until their standards met ours, then fine. But some of these are gone in 10 years. And 10 years, it seems like a long time, but that'll be over in no time, and some of our people will be out of business, and some people in particularly hard to train vocations such as agriculture.
All right, let's move on to some other things, although the economic side of it I want to get into a little later. I know that's one of your priorities is economic development. But one of the other issues, again, a very recent issue that you had to make a vote on was the Brady Bill.
Yes.
And, of course, the whole crime bill, gun control legislation. Your vote on the Brady Bill.
Well, I voted against the Brady Bill as it passed the House. And you have to remember that the Brady Bill went through a number of contortions, both in the House and the Senate. The Brady Bill has sort of come to symbolize a lot of the problems that we see as crime in the United States, but quite frankly, the way it passed the House in its original form ended up being a hodgepodge, and the President has signed this legislation into law. It's regrettable that we do end up with, again, a hodgepodge of checks. I was for an instantaneous check, which we could have provided for under the Brady Bill. It would have checked against
You're talking about a
felon.
background check?
Yes. It would have checked against a felonious record. As it turns out, we only have about 21 states that are capable now of doing that. So we passed a bill that's sort of a charade. There are 29 states that don't have that capability.
They can't check even in the 5 days?
They can't check in the 5 days. What's interesting is you just have a 5-day waiting period, so there's no mechanism in place. So that's what we ended up passing. So it doesn't do some of the things people think it will do. We didn't do what we needed to do. The other thing, too, is the House did not address some of those serious problems, some of the social problems, problems of education, problems dealing with a revolving system of justice. People are fed up with crime, but that Brady, as we passed it, is only going to put restrictions on people who legitimately will go and purchase a firearm. It doesn't do anything with 73 to 75% of the firearms that are used in the commission of a felony that are acquired in an illegal fashion, nor does it stem any of the problems that we have with people who are sentenced to 8 years or 10 years and serve 8 months, and they're back out in a revolving turnstile justice system. Those questions need to be addressed.
Are the questions that you're just raising, is that why it took so long? Jim Brady sat there and said, thank God, finally, when it was signed.
Well, again,
it took some, like 7
years. The Brady bill was one small element. It was like about 3% of all the crime legislation that was before the Congress. There was a massive bill. And what they did in the House, because the Brady was controversial, they picked that out, and it was done separately. And actually, I can't tell you all of the final provisions of Brady because it ended up going through the Senate, so many contortions at the end. I'll have to go back and read all the final provisions. I can tell you how it passed the House.
You can tell what you voted on.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. But that's how convoluted the Brady bill became. And in a way, I'm almost glad it passed because now that's out of the way. Now we can start talking about these other serious issues. When you have crimes being committed on the streets of Central Florida like they are in Detroit or New York or Los Angeles, those are real problems. When people don't have security in their own household, those are real problems. That's what we need to deal with now. So Brady's behind us. The rest of the bill was divided up into a number of little bills. A few of those were passed, non-controversial, some drug treatment for offenders. We passed, and I voted for taking guns out of minor children, children under 18, except for the certified sport purposes. Yeah, so some things we've started to address. We need to go back in January and tackle the real tough problems.
What happens in the U.S. Congress when, I mean, you sit here and I'm sure 434 of your colleagues go home and talk to people like me and say, these are the things we need to address, we need to do something. You know, and you've given us a little feeling for the frustration, I gather, up there of trying to do something. Well, what happens there?
If you can imagine, you know, I've been married for 21 years, and you go home and you discuss issues with your wife, and I'm happily married for 21 years, and we don't always agree on everything, and we chose to come together. Can you imagine 435 and another 100 in the Senate coming together, all thrown there by coincidence and elections, and all with their own opinions? That's the kind of controversy that we get and that we see. It's probably, as has been said, the worst form of government ever created. But there's except for the alternative.
That's right.
So we're fortunate, and it does work. I mean, we sort through these things. We air our linen in public, and we discuss these, and people see it through television, through nightly newscasts, and they get to talk to their representatives. So this is a great process, and it's a great filtering process. It's sort of like you said before the show, you don't want to see sausage made, but we're making legislative sausage. It's not pleasant, and it doesn't always turn out with the right flavor that we like, but it does work, and that's an amazing thing. I sit there on the House floor sometimes, and I'm just awed at the process. And I can have an impact as one out of 435, and we have impacted some of the federal policy.
Let me ask you, what was the toughest vote you had to struggle with? Can you pick one or two out that were really tough ones for you this past year?
Well, I would say probably the NAFTA, because it got so much hype. I was just glad when that was over. It became a very emotional issue with people. I tried to sort through that, but I'd say that was one of the tough ones.
It was interesting.
I look at every vote, though, And I try to say, you know, what's best for the state and for the country and for long-term benefit, and what won't cause more taxes and regulation and litigation and make a better life for people.
One of the issues that was over the last year, of course, which is a balance of that, what's good for the district or for the general state, and maybe not good for the country, was the Orlando Naval Training Center thing. And you did what you could to try to keep it here.
Well, I came on board a little bit late, just elected last year. Congressman McCollum did an excellent job in spearheading our efforts there. Unfortunately, there was a prejudice, I think, from the beginning with the Navy. There had been more of a history with the Great Lakes facility, and we had to contend with that. We also had the problem of the fixed assets up there, some of the hot plants, and the dispute about how much it would cost to move those types of equipments down here. So we had a lot of things going for us, but in the long term, we lost that battle because of some of the fixed assets and because some of the history of that facility, I think.
As a congressman, you know, when you're faced with something like that, obviously you're elected by the home folks, and what you want to do what you can for them, but it's the old pork barrel thing.
Well, some, but you know, you have to look for the benefit of the country. We are downsizing as far as the military. So our second responsibility is, now that we have that, how can we best utilize that? For example, the hospital for military dependents, for active personnel, for veterans. We moved in right away. I got some language.
There is a Navy hospital on the base now, and the VA is talking about building a brand new hospital.
Well, even if they started that hospital tomorrow, it might be 7 or 8 years before they could get that facility built, whether they built it in Orange or in Brevard County. In the meantime, you have one of the biggest veterans population in the United States, and growing every day in Central Florida. So we moved in. We've gotten permission both from the Secretary of Navy to convert that for use in the meantime, and legislatively I got some language put in the appropriations bill that permits use of that too, for military dependents, for veterans, and for other active personnel. Now the Base Reuse Commission here and the other agencies must determine the final use according to law. But we have set
kind of the wheels in motion.
Yes, and I'm very pleased with that. So my job now is to make lemonade out of the lemon.
Can you get things, obviously you are a congressman, when you make a phone call you probably get a lot of them returned from...
It's amazing how quickly I get my calls returned since I got elected, but that's one of the things, and you try to use that for the benefit of the district and for the people you represent.
Well, one of the things, and again, maybe I can get your perspective on this. I know during the campaign, and I mentioned earlier, your background was in business, but you've got a governmental affairs thing, and you did some lobbying, which is one of those words that's thrown around, and I think your opponent said, well, he's a lobbyist. But you're being lobbied now.
Well, I did represent, as you know, the International Airport, the Research Parks, and Harris Corporation, several Florida interests, in addition to having an international trade consulting firm. So I've seen all sides. I spent some time as an aide in the 70s. I was an elected official. The lobbyist thing is sort of blown out of proportion as far as, I think, the domestic lobbyist. I do have some concerns about the foreign lobbyist. I think that we're one country that does allow people to retain folks who have been part of the system and then represent a foreign interest. I think that needs to be looked at and checked, and I think we're doing that. As far as lobbying, domestic lobbying, that started when we first formed our government, and I think some of it's good. People can't go and petition their government firsthand sometimes, so they do have a representative, or they send someone from their association or group or interest, or they come by themselves. I get lobbied everywhere. I get lobbied in the lobby of
which is where the word
the television station. But it's a part of our system, as long as it's open and disclosed. And again, I have a problem with the foreign lobbying and people who say just were in government and turn around and are representing a foreign interest. I don't think that's right. Those are things that we need to change, but we need full disclosure on it, and we need to continue the process, because it is petitioning the government, and again done on equal and open terms.
When you campaigned, you made economic growth, creating jobs, one of
Yes.
your major cornerstones. How are things going there for you?
Well, it's tough. You know, we were talking about all the attorneys in Washington, and I find myself with a business background, just coming out of business, often preaching about simple business sense in Washington, and sometimes it doesn't jibe with what the bureaucrats and the attorney mentality has in mind. But I still think that's our number one priority. If we concentrate on jobs and economic development, everything else will fall into place. If you think about it, you know, the problems in healthcare, if people had jobs and good paying jobs, then we wouldn't have the healthcare problem that we have. If we had more money coming in from people who were taxpayers, we could provide for the truly needy. We could do better in education. So that is still my focus. I just am absolutely committed. And I don't think any big government programs made this country or its people successful. I think it's their business, the emphasis on the individual. I'm excited about some of the things that we can do with a new president, with President Clinton. I intend to go back and start working. We're talking about revising the welfare system, and I think he's come up with some ideas, and he's got the numbers of votes that can make some changes there. Have people work instead of receive welfare. Great idea. And do it with the business community. A fantastic idea. We'll have them in real jobs, paying real taxes and becoming real productive citizens. And then a lot of the other things will fall into place.
It'd be interesting, you mentioned we can move to what's going to come, because you mentioned a couple things there, but that was one of the interesting things about the NAFTA vote. It was not far from a straight party line vote.
That was not.
There was a coalition put together, and you see more of that happening when you're talking about the welfare reform.
And people felt very firmly committed on either side. You know, some felt it would help economic development. And I felt that was a little bit overrated, because you have a very small market in Mexico. In fact, I compared it on the House floor only to the capability of doing business with the country of Luxembourg. But people felt strongly about economic development and that issue and NAFTA. Those were genuine. It wasn't party at all.
Do you see more of that crossing of party lines in some of the voting as is?
Yes, a lot of it. In fact, I talked to my colleagues on the Republican side. Of course, you got to remember, you know, Republicans don't have enough votes to do much by themselves, maybe in the Senate with a filibuster. So there is a good bipartisan working relationship in many areas, and we have good ideas of minority and majority. So if you bring them together and come up with some plans and projects that can be effective, I think, you know, we can do a lot better for the country.
You mentioned the health care. That's one of the issues you'll be facing in the next term.
Big issue.
What do you see happening there?
Well, I think we'll come up with something, and I try to tell people that the major questions, there are really two major questions, is whether we have universal coverage. That's mandatory participation in this sort of government program that is part of the Clinton plan, or if you have universal access, which is ability for everyone who wants to access health care. Those are two of the big questions. And also, part of those questions are how you pay for it, whether it's mandated through an employer, required payment and a co-payment through an individual, or whether it's privatized where it's run through the individual and the individual gets their choice of health care, various health care plans and
is it safe to say, as it works its way through the Congress, it will not come out looking exactly the same as it went in?
Well, that's true, and already you're seeing the Cooper plan. Jimmy Cooper, a representative from Tennessee, he has a different plan than the Clinton plan. You have a Republican plan, several in the Senate, and I think you will see, again, what the Congress does is mesh all of these ideas, and hopefully it will be good. We must provide, again, some type of accessible, affordable, portable health care for the 34, 35 million people that are without it.
That's an issue we will be talking about over the next year, I'm sure. What else do you see coming down the next session?
Well, again, I think crime, economic development, welfare reform, all of those issues will be addressed by the Congress. I think healthcare will dominate the conversation, though, for the next 6 months until they settle on some type of coverage or access, as I mentioned.
All right, now I have to let you get a thing in here. I understand I'm sitting across from a certified taxpayer hero. Is that correct?
Well,
you were given an award.
Well,
Should mention that, though.
I've been given a couple of awards, which I'm real pleased with. One is on my reputation for not voting to expend a lot of taxpayer money foolishly. I also received a conservative award as far as my fiscal conservative voting. One of the 5 freshmen out of 110 that didn't vote for more taxation, regulation, or government involvement. And it's interesting, I could do those things and I still voted with the president about 26% of the time. So you can see that there is a mesh of opportunity.
What happens every congressman, I guess, no congressman I know of has ever, gone into office saying we need to raise taxes and spend more money, and yet when they get there, is there any way to control the government spending, or is it just eating away a little bit? Al Gore did his reinventing government proposals.
Well, I think that having been involved inside it for about a year now, that the only hope is a balanced budget amendment of the Constitution. You have 435 people and 100 senators who will literally vote. One time I stood up with Cliff Stearns, another representative, and we were trying to cut a program, and I said, will this be the first time in the history of the 103rd Congress that we actually cut a program? And Mr. Stearns said to that point it would be on the floor of the House.
Yeah.
But it's almost impossible. There are so many competing interests. So I think a balanced budget amendment, I'm the freshman coordinator of the balanced budget amendment on the Republican side, and I brought in many Democrats. In fact, I've got all 47 freshman Republicans signed on to the Smith, Stenholm, Kennedy, Mica,
which is the way they are.
bill. And I think we're going to get it. It was put off during this session in the Senate. I think it will come up. It'll pass the Senate, and my prediction is it'll pass the House, hopefully.
Well, we'll see what happens. We have practically run out of time. We've got just a couple of seconds. Of course, an overriding factor for anyone in the U.S. Congress, your re-election campaign is closer than your previous election now.
Yes. Again, the Founding Fathers set this system up to be very responsive, so you see your congressman at home and active participants in the community. I think it's a good system. I wouldn't change it. It drives me crazy sometimes.
Well,
I'd like to be appointed for a much longer
Thank you
term.
for participating with us, Congressman John Mica. That
Thank you,
is
Scott.
our show this week at Issue. I'm Scott Harris. A little bit.
Partial funding for this program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and through financial support of viewers like you.